Imagine you wake up 50,000 years ago. You open your eyes, stretch, and reach for food the same way you do today. But this time, the shelf is empty, no snacks, no fridge full of leftovers, no food delivery app, just silence. For a second, you just stand there like, okay, who did this? And then it hits you. There is no backup plan, no quick run to the store, no late night takeout, no, I'll eat later. If food is gone, food is gone. That sounds dramatic, but for ancient humans, that was normal. Every day could turn into a search for the next meal. Every season could change the rules. Every mistake could matter. So, how did they survive? How did people with no supermarkets, no farms, and no modern comforts keep going long enough to spread across the planet? That's the part we usually get wrong, because your ancestors did not survive by eating the same thing every day. They survived by being flexible, smart, and ready to use whatever the world handed them. And once you understand that, the whole story of ancient humans starts to look a lot less primitive and a lot more impressive. One of the biggest modern myths about ancient humans is that they ate one perfect ancestral diet. They didn't. They ate what was around. Some days that meant fruit, some days that meant roots, some days insects, some days seeds, some days meat if they were lucky, skilled, and patient enough to get it. Scientists who study ancient diets can actually read what people were eating from their bones and teeth. Using stable isotope analysis, researchers can tell whether a person ate more plants, more meat, or a mix of both. That matters because it tells us something important. Ancient humans did not live on one magic food. They lived on many. Their menu was not what's best. It was what's here, what's now, what works. In different places, that looked very different. On the coast, seafood mattered. In the forest, nuts and fruits took center stage. On the savanna, roots, tubers, and game animals became more important. That kind of flexibility is one reason they did not starve the way we imagine. They were not stuck on one way of eating, they were opportunists. And in a world where food is uncertain, being opportunistic is not a flaw. It is a survival superpower. Ancient humans were not just wandering around with hope and vibes. They were reading the environment like professionals. They knew where water was likely to collect after rain. They knew which plants came back in certain seasons. They knew which animals moved where and when. They knew when to return to a place and when to leave it alone. That kind of knowledge is not random. It is survival intelligence. Modern people think of nature as a backdrop. Ancient humans treated it like a map. If you know the map, you do not starve as easily. They could spot a good spot for digging roots, a good patch for fruit, a good path for animals, and a good time to move when food was getting scarce. To modernize, this might look simple. To ancient humans, it was the difference between eating and disappearing. They also learned to read the signs of the land. Cracked soil could mean water not far below. Certain plants could mean water nearby. Animal tracks could tell them what was moving, how recently, and in what direction. Migration patterns were not stories. They were calendars. This knowledge took years to build. It was passed down, taught, and practiced. Every generation inherited not just tools, but a mental library of survival information. That library kept them alive more than any single weapon ever could. One thing ancient humans understood very well was this: if something can be used, use it. They were not throwing away resources because they were bored of them. Bone could be broken for marrow. Fat mattered. Plants could be dried, ground, soaked, or cooked. Food could be shared, stored, or stretched. A lot of what modern people would call leftovers was probably valuable to them. That mindset is powerful because starvation does not always come from having nothing. Sometimes it comes from not knowing how to use what is already there. Ancient humans were too practical for that nonsense. They also knew how to plan for bad times. When food was plentiful, they might dry meat to preserve it. They might store nuts, seeds, or dried fruits. They might prepare and carry higher calorie foods when they knew they were moving into a leaner area. This is not perfect prehistoric meal prep. It is practical risk management. When the environment turned harsh, they didn't start from zero. They started from a base of stored food, stored knowledge, and stored experience. This is where humans become especially impressive. They shared. If someone got food, the whole group often benefited. That sounds warm and nice, but it was also brutally smart. Because today, you may be lucky. Tomorrow, somebody else may be lucky. And next week, the same person who found food today may be the one who needs help. That system turns survival into a group project. It means one bad day does not become one dead person. And honestly, that is one of the reasons humans became so successful. We were never just individual survivors. We became a species that could lean on each other. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show this in action. For example, among the Hadza in East Africa, food sharing is not random. Social norms push people to share more when the group depends on it, and the whole camp adjusts its behavior based on who is present and how much food is available. When food is unpredictable, spreading it across the group reduces the risk that one person's bad luck becomes a life or death situation. It also strengthens trust. If you know others will share when you are struggling, you are more likely to stay loyal to the group, cooperate, and invest in the team instead of going solo. That kind of cooperation is one of the biggest reasons we outlasted other species in the same environments. Fire was not only about warmth, it changed food. Cooking made many foods easier to digest and safer to eat. It helped unlock calories. It made harsh weather less dangerous. It gave people more time at night to work, talk, and prepare. Fire also turned darkness into usable time. That is a huge deal. Because once a group has fire, they can process food, repair tools, teach children, and keep going after sunset. So fire did not just protect ancient humans from cold. It made survival more efficient. Researchers have argued that humans are biologically adapted to cooked food, not raw food. In other words, we did not just find fire and like it. We evolved around it. That means ancient humans were not just surviving with fire. They were depending on it. Cooking softened tough plants and meat, making them easier to chew and digest. It killed some bacteria and parasites, making food safer. It made some foods more calorie dense by changing how the body processed them. That extra energy mattered. It could mean more brain function, more growth, more ability to survive lean times. So fire was not just comfort, it was biology. Ancient humans absolutely had lean times. They were not living in a permanent buffet, but they were built for bad seasons. They had fallback foods, they had shared knowledge, they had movement, they had fire, they had cooperation, they had memory. They could fall back on insects, small animals, roots, seeds, and other foods that were less exciting but still edible. They could move to a new area when the old ones stopped producing enough. They could rely on social networks to bring in food from other groups. One more thing that made ancient humans different was their brain. They could plan. They could remember. They could imagine future problems and prepare for them. A chimpanzee might eat what is in front of it and forget. A human could think, if I go that way tomorrow, I can come back here next week when the fruit is ripe. That kind of planning is powerful. It means ancient humans were not just reacting to hunger. They were playing a longer game. They could store mental maps. They could store food strategies. They could pass lessons to the next generation. That is why one bad season did not wipe them out. Because knowledge outlasts hunger. So why did your ancestors never starve? Not because life was easy. Not because food was always waiting. And definitely not because they had some magical ancient superpower. They survived because they were flexible enough to eat what was available, smart enough to read the land, and social enough to share when it mattered. They used fire to change food. They used movement to escape bad conditions. They used memory to predict where food would be. They used cooperation to turn individual luck into shared survival. In other words, they did not beat hunger by being lucky. They beat it by being human. And that is the hidden story behind your fridge today. When you open it and see options, you are living in a world your ancestors worked for thousands of generations to build. A world where food is not guaranteed, but where humans learned how to make it more reliable. So, next time you complain about nothing to eat, remember, your ancestors faced that feeling every day and they still found a way.